fourth semester, that is Insights 4 and Confluence 4. The faculty development program intends to orient the teachers for an effective deliverance of the new textbook in the classroom. We've had insightful talks by Chitra Panikar ma'am, the chairperson, and the other various textbook committee members. And I'm so delighted today we have amongst us Dr. Yoganand sir, who will speak on the fourth semester textbook. On behalf of Jain College and the Department of English, I would like to welcome you, sir. I would also like to welcome our respected principal, Dr. Naveen Kumar CM, for this fifth day faculty development program. Now, I would take this opportunity to introduce Dr. Yoganand sir to the gathering. Yoganand sir has taught English to both undergraduate and the postgraduate levels in well-known colleges and universities in Bangalore for the past 3 decades. He has postgraduate from Bangalore University and holds MPhil thesis titled Animal Narrators or Social and Cultural Texts, and PhD degree. His doctoral thesis was on popular culture and literature. The thesis titled License to Thrill, Mapping the Literary Origins and Sociology of Thriller Narratives. Yoganand sir has edited several books and published over 40 research papers in national and international journals, apart from being on the editorial and the review panels of reputed journals. He is on the board of studies of several institutions and universities and colleges in India and is also supervising MPhil and PhD research scholar dissertations. His areas of interest are popular culture studies, eco criticism, Indian drama, curriculum, and research designs. So, we would like to give a warm welcome to Dr. Yoganand sir. Sir, you can start with your session. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Katyayani ma'am.
Thank you, sir.
And let me begin by thanking Jain College, Vishweshwarapuram branch, and also the textbook committee for having invited me to spend, or I wouldn't say having given me some opportunity, this opportunity for to share my thoughts with my teacher friends across Bangalore, affiliated to Bangalore City University. I must thank all of you for having given me this opportunity to spend some time with you. Obviously, the fourth semester, I've been told that this is a workshop for acclimatizing teachers from different colleges to new set of texts that have been introduced this semester, or rather the process of which started maybe 3 semesters ago, and probably this, insofar as general English is concerned, is the last semester. Well, this kind of having some kind of orientation program whenever textbook changes is a very welcome thing. Something that I remember I was a part of, having started something like this. I was a part of this way back in 1999, 2000, when I was also a member of the textbook committee. This is a very welcome step. I hope more and more colleges host these kind of programs. So in a way, I'm very, very happy that though I am not a part of Bangalore University anymore, I'm very happy that this tradition is something that is being continued with, and I hope it will be continued with in years to come. And once again, thank you, the principal, the management, the Department of English of Jain University, Vipram, as well as the textbook committee. Well, what I thought I would spend some time with is trying to initiate a discussion on Kuvempu's Kalki, which I'm told is included or has been included in the textbook. Now, the most obvious thing is this: Kuvempu is a very well-known poet, and there isn't much that I would like to say about Kuvempu. Most of you uh, know Kuvempu, but of course, there's also another thing, that small thing that I'd like to clarify before I begin, and that is we are not going to. I'm not going to get into the issues related with translation. We know very well that that can always be an issue. But however, we are not going to, at least I'm not going to get into the problems that might arise. Because these problems, I'm not saying that they are not valid. They are valid because they may impact our interpretation or our understanding. But however, whatever is translated, whatever is prescribed, I'd like to take that as given and not get into the nuances of translation and the kind of problems that it might cause. That's fairly obvious. But that's not how we would go about in a class. Rather, I thought it would be more. I mean, the problems that are raised by the problems that arise with the translations, that's something that scholars will go into. But here, when we are dealing with this text or discussing this text in the class, keeping in mind that it is a fourth semester class, fourth semester BCom class, I wouldn't dwell too much on, I wouldn't like to dwell, at least in the limited time that I have, I wouldn't like to dwell too much on the nuances or the problems associated with the translation, how they could or they may impact uh, our interpretation. So whatever is given is given. Also, I do not know, Kuvempu must have been translated, this poem must have been translated by several translators. I do not know which particular translation, which particular version has been prescribed. I will follow the one that I have, and the one that I have is Javaregoda's collection, collection of poems entitled Selected Poems of Kuvempu, which have been translated into English by different translators, but edited by Professor Javaregoda. And this is published from Hampi University. So it is possible that if you are following another version, there may be slight changes here and there when I quote some of these lines. So please bear with me. I'm following that translation, that version. Having said that, what interests me in this poem is a fairly, though a little longish, this poem reads very well, reads very, very fast. Though the fact that it's a longish kind of a poem, generally we have a tendency to be put off by a longish kind of a poem, uh, and we usually have this kind of an excuse that it's impossible to hold the attention of students for a long period of time. So usually it is the shorter pieces that are prescribed. But I wouldn't say it's wrong having this poem being prescribed. Though this is a longish kind of a poem, this reads, as I said, very well, and it moves very, very fast, which is something that most of you by now must have noticed. If you've read the poem, I'm sure you've read the poem. Uh, and it's fairly obvious that there are two things that are happening in the poem. The first thing is, look at the title, Kalki itself. And then if you go on to read lines like this, the mansions of the rich rose on one side, the hutments of the poor stood on the other side. Blazing crystals, lamps there, darkness, pitch darkness here. The soft voice of song on that side, the long scream of lament on this side. From pride their food they threw away there, for want of food they pined away here. There you saw a park, and here you saw a grave. And in silks they paraded themselves there, not a rag to cover their lions here. So if you read these lines, so this is somewhere in the first 15, 20 lines of the poem, first 20, 25 lines of the poem. Now, if you read these lines, it's fairly obvious that there is a hint of Marxism here, especially when he's talking about there and here. Kuempu clearly happens to be on the side of here. And what is it that we find there? There we find riches. There we find crystal lamps, soft songs, and people throwing away food because they have too much of it. And there they have parks. Here on this side, look at the word here, there. These words here and there. There is obviously something that suggests distance, something that is far away from you. Here is a word which suggests nearness, proximity. So clearly, Kuempu seems to be on the side of here. And what is it that we find here? Here we have pitch darkness, long scream of lament, and people starving, graves, people lacking enough clothes on their bodies. So obviously, there is a there and there is a here, which means it is situating the poem is giving us all the kind of detail that are necessary for anyone who even has a working kind of an acquaintance with Marxism, socialism, or some of the core principles of postulates of socialism or Marxism. It is very, very clear. This kind of a binary that exists in the society, this kind of a division that exists in the society, that is what is being articulated here in these lines. So look at how would I like to look at the poem? I would like to look at this poem from this point of view. That is what I'm trying to tell you. On one hand, the poem is, the title is Kalki, and clearly it is drawn from the field of mythology. And then we have somewhere throughout the poem, we have these lines like these. I could read a few more, but that would only be a waste of time. I don't have to prove anything that I would not be able to prove by reading these lines. So therefore, on one hand, you have myths, one clear domain of myths on one hand. I will go into that. And on the other hand, you have clearly a preference, a kind of a preference, a proclivity, let us say, for predilection for Marxist thoughts, Marxist sentiments. Now, in itself, when we try to contextualize the poem in these terms, you will see that they belong to two different domains and they are hostile, because myth usually is a major part of religion, and Marxism is something that has always had problems with religion. And we know Marx stands on religion, where he calls religion, where he says religion is the opium of the people. So here you have two hostile domains, or rather, domains that are antithetical to each other, inimical to each other, and hostile to each other. One does not accommodate the other. Religion does not accommodate socialist and Marxist postulates, and Marxism does not accommodate religion. So now, what is it that Kuempu is doing? From my point of view, Kuempu is trying to use poetry, or rather, I would say that in this poem, Kuempu searches for a common ground. This poem is remarkable from my point of view, because this poem is trying to tell us the kind of possibilities that are made possible by a poem, literature, a work of art. Art is something that can bring together very, very antithetical, hostile elements. Often these are opposites to each other. We saw this, of course, such of us who have been students of English literature have, of course, come across William Blake's Songs of Innocence and Songs of Experience. So it's not new to us. But this poem is a very good attempt at doing something that William Blake also does in his poems under the collection Songs of Experience and Songs of we have a question. Yes, myth is a worldview as archetypes highlight. To say just religion would be limited. That's true. I agree. In a way, to define myth, most scholars admit that it is impossible to define myth. They admit that it is impossible to define myth in terms that are acceptable and intelligible to all. That's something that I'm not saying that I'm limiting it to religion. I'm saying that it is a very important component of any religion. That's all that I'm saying. I'm not saying that it's just limited to religion. I wouldn't make a sweeping statement like that. I'm aware of the kind of problems that I would get into if I make a sweeping statement like that. I was only saying, again, Anita ma'am, I was only saying that it is a very integral, important part of any religion. If you look at any religion, irrespective of which religion it is, you will get lots of myths embedded in these religions. So therefore, you can also see, and also, I wouldn't be too very wrong to uh, advance a view like that, to say that myths are a very important part of religion, especially in the context of this poem. I'll give you a couple of details a few minutes later. So therefore, for me, what is very, very interesting in the poem is how Kuvempu is trying to find a common ground and present poetry, art, literature as something that can bring together very, very hostile ideologies. Obviously, look at the context in which the poem was written. We must remember, if you do some reference work, or if you are familiar with Kuvempu's works, one of his most important collections of poems is called Panchajanya. This poem, Kalki, was actually included in this collection called Panchajanya, and this was published in 1936. 1936 is also a very, very important year from the point of view of India's independence movement, and also from the point of view of literary studies. Because we might remember that 1936 is also the year in which there was a meeting that was held in Lucknow. And the meeting was basically of writers who were involved in what's called as the progressive movement. And this progressive movement, as one of those very well known critics, Shirdas, points out, this progressive movement, and also remember 1936 is also the year in which Untouchable was published, Mulk Raj Anand's Untouchable was published. So you can see that the year 1936 is a very, very important year from different points of view insofar as Indians are concerned. I'm only limiting myself to the literary importance of the year. This particular conference, or rather meeting of writers, writers from different parts of India, writing in different languages, gathered in Lucknow, and they had this meeting. And this progressive movements, one of the most important aspects of these progressive writers was that they had a very strong inclination towards socialism or Marxism. Of course, I do know the difference between socialism and Marxism. For time being, I'm using it synonymously. For time being, that is all. But and that is fairly all right insofar as this poem is concerned, because we are not engaged in discussion, a full-scale discussion on Marxism and socialism and trying to point out the differences between. There are differences, yes, but there are also some common elements. So it's on that it's that aspect that is of interest to me, and that is what I mean when I perhaps sometimes may use these two terms synonymously in the course of this short discussion. So that was a very important aspect, that socialist or the Marxist bent tilt that that the writers evinced in that movement was very, very evident. However, coming back to the circumstances under which this poem was published, the the title of the collection of poems was called Panchajanya, and I have to remind you what Panchajanya is. You all know that anyone who's familiar with Mahabharata, uh, anyone who's familiar with Mahabharata, for him or her, the allusion is at once clear. We know that Krishna, again, one of the avatars of Vishnu. Kalki is also supposed to be one of the avatars of Vishnu in our pantheon of gods. That is our Dashavatara scheme of things. So Krishna signals the commencement of the great war, remember, by sounding his divine conch, Panchajanya, the name of the conch on which Krishna signals the commencement of the war. And obviously, most of the poems that are included in that collection, it's only one poem that is prescribed for our study, but most of the poems that are prescribed in that study, rather than that collection, will remind us, no matter which poem you take, most of them remind us that uh, the war, the great Kurukshetra, was fought to establish dharma. And we can see when we read this poem, this becomes particularly true. Who imparts this spirit uh, very, very strongly to his poem, to this poem Kalki. Now, again, another interesting thing that, as I said, why would I be justified in saying that myth is an important integral part of religion? Some of these lines you see here, if you read a little later in the poem, those who were deaf to the wails of the poor, and those who had donned the ochre robes of the monk, just for the sake of filling their big bellies, who, by feeding the hungry poor with ignorant superstition, had brought themselves a life of wealth and comfort, and touched not anything but rich, luxurious fare. Obviously, this is an overt allusion to priests and their votaries. And then again, they form a very important aspect of religion. And if you take a look at some details here, ochre, robes, etc., it clearly is an indicator, it clearly is indication which religion that he is referring to. Now, when we take a look at these kind of details, it becomes very, very apparent that the poem is trying to conflate the two inimical domains, that of religion and that of Marxism. So this is what is of interest to me as I read the poem. Otherwise, the poem is fairly simple. We see that the narrator in the poem, and also look at how the poem is framed. It is framed in a dream. The opening few lines will make it very, very clear. And this is how the poem opens. It opens with the mention of the speaker trudging and toiling through a dream street in the world of sleep, losing his way here and there, only to find in the midst of a primeval forest that is very dense, immense, with gigantic trees untold and creepers close intertwined. This obviously is not people friendly. This forest is not something that accommodates people. Because it has, as the poem, to quote again from the poem, bushes full of thorns, creepers with saw-toothed leaves, and prickly pears looming like specters. However, it is the speaker and his courage that gets him to traverse the horrible forest where phantoms of fear slunk and stalked. And then, having crossed this horrible forest, the speaker comes to a mountain whose summit touches the very clouds. The speaker, through the arduous climb, scales the mountain to reach its crest and provides a vantage point to peer down on a city of sheer enchantment. Now, the fact that this poem is framed in a dream. Now, again, if you read a couple of lines, other lines that I have not read here, he is talking about was it light or darkness, which was neither light nor darkness. Then I saw a weird half light. Well, clearly, what he's trying to bring about here is this. Make me right at the beginning. He is the fact that it is framed in a dream, and the fact that he is able to see something in his dream clearly indicates that there is an attempt that is being made to take certain things out of these binaries. That is why, which was neither light nor darkness. Light and darkness are binaries, as we know. But the poet states, the poem states, it is neither dark nor light. So, what does it mean? On one hand, please notice in the first few lines, when the poem is describing the journey that the narrator of the poem makes through this primeval forest. And then what the narrator sees uh, from the summit of the crest, what he calls as the city of sheer enchantment. On one hand, he is in a state which goes beyond the binaries, but what he sees is framed in binaries. So, therefore, you have the there and here. So, please, that's what I'm trying to say. What gives credence to my interpretation or my suggestion that Wempu is trying to break down these binaries, that is, religion, myths on one hand, and Marxism, socialism on the other hand. These, in a way, can be seen as binaries. So he is breaking this binary. This is what is of interest to me. And as we read, of course, nowhere in the poem does Kuempu mention the word capitalism, capitalist very, very explicitly. But like I said, anyone who is aware of certain very, very uh, famous principles of Marxism will immediately be able to locate it in the context of the Marxist paradigm. The coordinates are very, very clear. The Marxist coordinates are very, very clear, especially in the lines that I read out, the blazing crystal lamps there, the darkness, pitch darkness here, etc. So, in a way, this will compel the reader to locate it in the Marxist paradigm. And obviously, these lines are a scathing comment on the society that has ruthlessly divided its people uh, between those who in silks parade and those without a rag to cover their loins here. Uh, Once again, let us also remember the context in which Kuempu wrote this poem. Indian independence movement was almost at its height. So, in a way, the fact that he is critiquing the capitalist thrust of the British Empire becomes very, very evident because the British Empire was based on, everyone knows this is not something anything new. The British Empire was predicated on capitalist interests, business interests. So Kuempu is, in a way, of course, you could say that this is also a post-colonial reading. It is possible that you can also attempt a post-colonial reading of this poem, especially if you look at the context and see how it is related to, how it is a comment on the British Empire. These are some of the things. And then the fact that on one hand, if you have this Marxist paradigm being brought out very, very clearly, the religious paradigm is also brought out very, very clearly. Look at, for example, what the fire does. As he sees from the mountain, or rather the top of the mountain, what is it that he sees? He sees a lot of things. He also hears the screams of babes and children, mothers expecting children, and mother in childbed, newly-wed brides and long-married ladies, the young and the old, and the lame and the deaf. A few lines before that, we see a fire breaking out. This fire is supposed to be, Kuempu says, is the fire that's there in the belly of the poor man. But how does he, what kind of characteristics does Kuempu give to the fire? The fire of the poor man's hunger. It reaches up the clouds, up to the skies. And very interestingly, though this fire that arises in the belly of the poor man is directed at the rich, it also destroys the hutments of the poor, which means, in other words, uh, it is doing what it does without discrimination. In other words, it doesn't matter who sets the fire, it will burn down anything and everything without any discrimination, is what Wempu seems to be suggesting. And we also see that the kind of characteristic that Kuempu, this kind of a characteristic that Kuempu maps on to the fire is clearly the very characteristics that are attributed to Agni. In other words, while he's doing that, he's also trying to attribute the kind of divinity to the poor man's hunger. So the fire in its fury, like Agni in Vedas, ruins or burns down the vulnerable and spares no one, but it reserves its special wrath for the rich man. And then you have these allusions to the priests and their votaries now, which conflates with the extended description of the economic disparities that I quoted a few minutes ago. That is the lamps, their crystal lamps, their pitch darkness here, those lines. So you can see that the economic disparities they present coordinates locate the poem in, like I said, the classical Marxist paradigm. Well, this in a way neatly aligns with some extensions, as I was saying, with with some extensions, like I said, with the Marxist dictum that religion is the opium of the masses. This, as we all know, forms the cornerstone of Marxism's stance on the question of religions. It's also common knowledge that Marx is of the view that all religions and religious institutions are bourgeois apparatuses that are created to validate the exploitation of the working classes by confusing them, by befuddling them. And we also must remember that much of Marxist ideas have been revisited in the last 60, 70 years. But it must be remembered that these critics were not available, that these critics that have emerged in the last 60, 70 years were not available to Kuempu, who was writing this poem in the early 1930s. When we do a bit of reference work into Kuempu's influences or kind of influences that Kuempu had, we see that his initiation to the Marxist thought had come from a translation of Lenin's biography into Kannada that had been published in 1923. Well, now that we've seen the kind of criticism that has been leveled against some of the postulates, Marxian postulates, well, Kuempu's stance, Kuempu's ideas may sound a little naive as it attempts to transport the Marxist dictum without being aware of and sensitive to the complexities of transporting. Marx himself has been seen as anti-India. We know one of his essays, that comes out very clearly. But these are things that we have become aware of now in the last 40, 50 years. But this, unfortunately, was not available to Kuempu at the time that he was writing this poem. What Kuempu does is to resituate the ancient Puranic myth in the framework of modern Marxist formulations. And we must remember that these Marxist formulations, as he tried to locate the myths in, was in the context of the views that were available at that time. So as we go along, the destruction that is caused by the fire in the poem also presages the appearance of Kalki. And Kalki is indeed the poor man himself. Now, one thing that is very interesting about Kalki is this, or one thing that is unique about Kalki is this: of the 10 Dashavatars, Kalki is unique. Unique in the sense that the 9 avatars have come and gone. The 10th one is yet to come. And this is what Kuempu, this imparts some kind of a pliability to the myth. And this is what Kuempu is focusing on. This is what makes Kuempu use this myth so very well and locate it in, or try to integrate it or conflate it with the Marxist paradigm. Well, then again, any Indian reader would know this, that Kuempu is the 10th incarnation, like as I was saying, and the 9 other incarnations, they express function of any of these 10 avatars is to put an end to the wickedness and establish a kingdom of righteousness. That has been the express intent of all these 10 avatars. And again, it would not be necessary to remind that unlike the 9 avatars, like I said, this incarnation has yet to be made. And if we go back to the Vishnu Purana, Kalki's appearance as a fulfillment of Lord Vishnu's promise to humanity to reincarnate himself periodically on earth to redress the dharmic imbalance is occasioned by the prevalence of the condition in which the kings will be of churlish spirit. So when will this 10th avatar, when will Kali avatar, Kalki avatar, when will this come about? Now, if we go back to Vishnu Purana, we see the circumstances under which it's predicted. You can call it a prediction. It is foretold. When will Kalki make the appearance? This is it. When the kings will be of churlish spirit, violent temper, and ever addicted to falsehood and wickedness. They will inflict death on women, children, and cows. They will seize power, the power of subjects, be of limited power, and will, for most part, rapidly rise and fall. Their desires insatiable, and they will display little piety. Which means basically, Kalki is seen as the Messiah who will appear at the end of the present age, that is the Kali Yuga. Well, in a way, Kuempu does not explore the causes for the generation of the economic imbalances. Not explicitly in the poem, of course, but it is clear that the idea is embedded in the Puranic prediction that augurs that foresees, preempts the incarnation. Especially look at these lines from the poem. They will seize the power and the property of the subjects. I mean, this is what is there in the Puranas. And if you match this with some of the lines in the poem, you will see that they almost are echoing. And it is this detail that facilitates Kuempu's attempt to create a platform that will not just seamlessly interweave the ancient Puranic belief with the modern Marxist 20th century, 19th century, late 19th century, 20th century Marxist belief, but also extend the margins of the two irreconcilable, hostile, and antithetical ideologies. They don't cohabit, but Kuempu's great talent brings the two of them, the antithetical, together. And then what is the new spectacle that we see? What is the new spectacle that the narrator in the poem sees? And if we look at what Kuempu wrote in another poem, very clearly, which is actually a sonnet that he wrote. Why is he writing this? Why is he writing something like this? Clearly indicative, or I mean, this is uh, something that is clearly uh, expressed in another sonnet that he wrote, the title of which the poem, which is called Kali of Revolution. If you read that one short poem, you will see he is exhorting his fellow writers to throw out parrots, cuckoos, springs, creepers and curls, cool breezes, fairy tales of kings, and moonshine from your poetry. O you cupboard, your duty today is to sing of poverty and manure, of swords, spades, and crowbars, and sweat and blood. So basically, please notice this only adds credence to my claim that there is a very strong Marxist element in the poem. Well, then again, if you read some of these lines, like say, what was this new spectacle? Falls of blood, stink of human flesh, plunging, did the blood roar. Springing from it was the people's anguished scream. The heavens were all blood. The earth was all blood. Look everywhere, it was blood. It was blood. Oh, and alas, it was blood. In the plunging red blood fall, human skulls, human trunks were plunging down as the hailstones rolled down in the monsoon's swollen streams. Rising up was the spray of hot blood. If you read this, it's a very gory, grotesque, very violent kind of an image that Kuempu is painting here. And usually, what teachers, professors in the class, when we are discussing a poem called imagery, uh, uh, usually what writers do is when they wish to create an imagery, a specific kind of an imagery, they don't use the same word several times. What they usually do is they use synonyms or words associated with that word several times and create that imagery. Uh, Two notable examples that come immediately to my mind uh, are, for example, Macbeth, where blood image dominates, the blood imagery dominates the play. But if you read the play, not many times is the word blood mentioned. There you have words that are associated with blood mentioned, and that creates the imagery and sustains the imagery throughout. Another interesting play, again by Shakespeare, is Midsummer's Night Dream, where throughout the text you have the imagery of moon uh, being used, or rather moon or things, ideas associated with moon being used. So what generally writers do to create this kind of image or this kind of an effect is not to use the same word directly or repeat the same word. They use generally words that are associated, ideas that are associated with the word, and that is how they create that effect. But that's not what Puepo does. If you look at that section that I just read out, you will see that the word blood is mentioned not once, twice, but more than 13, 14 times. Again, so that very clearly shows that Wempo wanted to hit the nail on its head and make no pretensions, no bones about it. Also, another interesting thing about literature, ideas, views on literature that Marxists have is this, that they don't go in for aesthetics. Aesthetics do not matter much to them. Whatever they have to say it straight. And therefore, it is possible that we can only conjecture, we cannot say anything conclusively. This is the reason why this is the reason why he did not do it. That's something that we cannot say very conclusively, we can only conjecture. But Kuempu seems to be falling into that specific uh, frame of mind, where he is not too very like I gave you the examples of Macbeth and uh, Midsummer's Night Dream. Shakespeare writers do not use the same word several times repeatedly, and that too in close section like this. If you read that particular section in the poem, the word blood seems to be mentioned in almost every line, and in some lines twice. So Shakespeare wouldn't have done it. More writers who are interested in aesthetics won't do that. You can come. I mean, you can with your experience of reading, having read text, analyzed text, taught text. I'm sure you must have come across this. Writers do not. Writers who are very inclined towards aesthetics will not do that. They will not use the same word. Kuvempu does not seem to be. He seems to be sacrificing aesthetics here, though in the overall scheme of things, it is the aesthetics of literature, poetry, that seems to be enabling Kuvempu to bring together these two hostile domains together, hostile ideologies, systems of thought uh, together. Again, that's very, very interesting. I would be very interested in pursuing this kind of an idea. Now, however, I have only 2 or 3 minutes. I will wind up my talk in the 2 or 3 minutes. So most now, if you read the description of Kalki here in the poem, Kalki is what poem calls the skeleton man, who is mounted on a skeleton horse, shaking his hoary white beard, the very spectre of a man. In his right hand, a sword flashing like lightning, and in his left, lightning itself. A skeleton horse, a skeleton rider. Was this the selfsame Kalki, the skeleton man, the very spectre of man? Once again, if you go back to Puranic descriptions of Kalki and the popular pictorial depictions or representations of Kalki, you will see that Kalki usually is represented as a white man riding a white horse with a sword in his hand. The idea, generally in the opinion of the scholars, this idea of Kalki with the white man, Kalki as a white man riding a white horse, entered India with the Parthian uh, invasions of the first centuries of the Christian era, a time when the millennial ideas were rampant in Europe, and in which Kalki himself has the form of the invader. He comes riding upon a white horse, like the Scythian and the Parthian invaders of India. So, therefore, the image of Kalki, as can be seen, was appropriated by the Puranic authors. For in the Puranas, if you're familiar, in the Puranas, Kalki's objective is to destroy the invaders, to raise the wicked cities of the plain, which had become polluted by the foreign kings. This very same horseman. Now, what Kuvempu does is he extends this appropriation. What I'm saying is the Puranic authors appropriated the idea of Kalki. Kuvempu takes Kalki, and Kalki, as is in the Puranic descriptions, and then extends it. And what he does is what I'm saying is that he extends this appropriation by making a few changes in Kalki's appearance. In the Vishnu Purana, once again, Kalki is represented as a white man riding a white horse. And Kuvempu's Kalki is a bloodthirsty skeleton rider mounted on an equally bloodthirsty skeleton horse. So, in a way, Kuvempu's Kalki and horse, along with being bloodthirsty, also have an insatiable appetite. And since Kalki is the poor man incarnate, he says earlier in the poem, the obvious explanation is that the poor have been kept hungry and thirsty for such a long time that their thirst and hunger has assumed what Kuvempu calls is the quenchless proportion. So, in a way, I would bank on these lines and say that The lines or the poem can be read as the poet's attempt to suggest that the quenchless thirst that the bellies of the poor have acquired is the result of the capitalist economy's practice of maintaining the labor at below the subsistence level, which again, what Marx calls as wage slaves. So these are some of the reasons why I would very strongly argue that the poem wonderfully brings out the potential of literature, of poetry. Poetry is capable of bringing together, wedding, so to say, marrying, so to say, these hostile ideologies. Well, that's all the time that I think I have. I think I have extended by 10-15 minutes. I promised that I would close my presentation at by 4:45. It's almost 4:55. It's almost 10 minutes. I'm very sorry for having extended my talk for 10 minutes. If you have any questions, maybe I may not be able to answer. But anyway, you can always share. That could not necessary that what I say is the only way in which we can read the poem. I would like to read this poem that way. Now, much of what I said is a part of a paper that I wrote about 6 years ago. I think in 2015, it was published in a journal called Remarking. In 2015, I had written a paper on poem Kalki, this particular poem. So much of my discussion here, my presentation here is taken from the paper. Since I am the author of the paper, I don't think it's a case of plagiarism. I'm only sharing what I've written, and I wrote this about 6 years ago. Any questions? If you have any questions, or if you would like to add something to what I have presented here, that would be welcome. I don't know how the questions are going to be asked. Is it going to be through chats that the questions are going to be asked? I don't know. I mean, you might have done something like that yesterday, day before. So whatever the practice is, please go ahead and.
Katyani ma'am, you there? The questions will be posted in the chat box, and we'll take it up. I request the participants to kindly post the questions in the chat box, your suggestions and your comments.
Sir, good evening. This is Akhila from Jain College. I'm one of the faculties of Jain College, Vivipuram. I just wanted to know, after your insightful discussion on Kalki, as in to bring it to the students, any tips, sir? Because this poem is quite, different to them. So I just would like to know your tips on how to bring it to the students, to their understanding as it is prescribed for the BCom students of the 4th semester.
Kila ma'am, that in itself I would say is the advantage. Now, what this poem is doing, if you interpret it the way I did, I mean, if you think that my interpretation is well worth a try in the class.
Yes, sir. Yes.
I would simply say the fact that it is prescribed, I would congratulate the members of the textbook committee for having prescribed this or the
Yes.
BCom students, because it's hitting,
Yes, yes.
it's critiquing the capitalist initiatives. So I probably would, because it's a BCom class, I would probably dwell on that. I would present that. I would foreground that, the fact that this is a poem that is critiquing the capitalist initiatives.
Correct, sir.
I would, you see, the one of the things that I believe literature does is that it is subversive. We know that there is no running away from that. Literary theories that have come in the last 60, 70 years have very clearly
Yes.
established the subversive elements
Yeah.
that are embedded in literature. So there is no harm in promoting, or rather advancing this idea, presenting them this idea that on one hand they may learn accountancy, on one hand they may learn so many other practices that might enhance the profit of a company. But on the other hand, the ugly underbelly of capitalism.
Yes, that's very important. Correct.
Of course, I've taught early in my career. I did teach, not in the last 10 12 years, but before that, I did teach BCom classes also. I used to teach BCom classes. Unfortunately, in the last 10 12 years, I've not been teaching UG classes at all. But I would I would have, if the nature, the demeanor, the mindset of BCom students, I don't think has changed much. I don't think it changes. Certain things remain the same. You may say that you lost touch with the BCom students 10, 12 years ago. Another generation, 2 generations have come. Yeah, I agree with all that, but certain things have not changed. So I would advance, I would foreground this. I would say that, see, business, what you call as business, what you call as profit, etc., also has a dark underbelly to it. And people always pay the price. And it is necessary for us to also spare a thought for those people who pay the price.
And we can, attach the current affairs and exemplify a lot.
I didn't want to very obviously state that, but somewhere or the other, I think I may have hinted that.
No, it leads to a discussion, then we can bring in all these points, is
Yes,
what I.
that's very controversial. I mean, what you'll always get some hardcore adherents of capitalism. You'll always get. So that will make an interesting discussion.
Thank you, sir.
Yes, sir. Thank you, sir. Murtappa, sir. Thank you. Thank you, Sushila ma'am. Thank you, Hemproma ma'am. Thank you, Rajni ma'am, Dr. Rajni Chauhan. Thank you. I don't know if I've met you, but I think Murtappa sir, I think I've met. I don't know if I've met the others. Thank you, Manoj. Anything else?
Sir, I have a question. Our students, given the context that we don't have much discussion on inequalities in the society, and not very politicized topics are able to be. I mean, we were not able to discuss, or even in the campuses, to talk about a lot of issues of social concern about inequalities. For example, when I was studying in my university, there was already a atmosphere where these discussions were easier to talk about, because there was a certain atmosphere of talking about social justice in a particular way. But given that, in our own whatever, such things may not be very easily possible. Um, uh, Poems like this do becomes difficult to even discuss certain things. I'm not saying one should not discuss. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is, talking about this in the right pitch to really sensitize them to the issues of inequality. And I'm not saying one should soft pedal. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is, how do we wisely make them uncomfortable? At the same time, is it possible at all? I don't know. But here Kuvempu is very clear. I mean, he's scathing. I mean, it's a scathing poem. I mean, he's being clearly saying, look, this is what we are all heading to. This is what will happen if you don't are aware of yourself. For me, this navigating this whole thing of actually talking about social justice, about being sensitive, being open to the issues of poverty, of many other things. For me, how do I take it forward? Probably not in a very, what shall I say? Not in a very disturbing, or I want to make them uncomfortable. Yet I don't want to make it so controversial or whatever. I don't know what word to use, because they are not exposed to it. See, they come from a background where they're still not initiated to these kind of thinking processes. So how do we navigate such discussions in the classroom is a challenge that I think as a teacher I always have felt. Because this poem gives me an opportunity to enter that space, but how do I do it? What do you think as an experienced teacher? How do we engage with such narratives?
I understand that that's a challenge, and that has become a very, very grave kind of a challenge, a serious kind of a challenge in the last 10-15 years. But it would have been easy to discuss things like capitalism, the ill effects of capitalism, the poverty that it brings in its wake, etc. If we were to be doing this in an aided institution or a government-sponsored college, it would be easier there. But in private universities, private colleges, this would become difficult. I understand. I've seen that. Because look at any student movement. In the last 5-6 years, we've seen several student movements. And we've seen student movements in JNU, we have seen student movements in BHU, IIT, Jamia Millia, University of Hyderabad. Now, there have been more than 20-25 in the last 5-6 years. We've been reading in newspapers, we've been seeing the kind of student movements that have been taking place in the last 5-6 years, like I said. But one thing that you notice, there is a pattern. All these student movements are originating in government institutions, not in private institutions. Not a single private institution have we seen even a semblance of this kind of a movement. So there is a problem. I understand that. Because any private institution, for that matter, is founded on certain principles. Now, let us not go into. I wouldn't like to spend the last 2 or 3 minutes or 5 minutes that I have going into that exists. Obviously, that exists, and it's not easy to come out of that. The solution to your problem, if I were to be in your place, would be simply this: ask the students to read and ask them to come out with it, rather than you telling them. Ask the students to read these lines and ask them, what could it suggest? What could the Kuvempu be suggesting? What could the poet be suggesting? Now, sometimes it's not necessary for us to make statements. Sometimes it's enough for us to ask questions. I would do that. I would do that.
Yeah. Okay, sir. Thank you.
You're not guilty of making things very uncomfortable for them, and yet you would have done what you wanted to do. Ultimately, what is it that we want as teachers? What is it that we want to do?
Exactly, we want to sensitize them. Yeah, we want to sensitize them. We want them to also look at other realities and look beyond one's. That's all it is about. Finally, the attempt is to be sensitive to all the issues that
See, what we may think is sensitive may not be sensitive to them. What we can only do is draw their attention.
Yeah,
Right?
I mean sensitize them. You have to make them sensitive, not sensitive in that way. I'm saying. So how do I sensitize them to these issues of inequalities, and how one needs to be aware? Probably is where one can Okay, sir. Thank you, sir.
The first step towards sensitizing anyone to anything is to draw their attention to it.
Yes. Yeah.
Right? Draw their attention. And how can you draw their attention? If I were you, I would ask my students to read those lines and tell them, what do you think? Ask them, what do you think they mean? What do you think the poem is trying to say? And my bet is that they themselves will come out with it.
Yeah.
They will come out with it. So very obvious. And also, Kuvempu is talking about a revolution in the poem. And Kalki is that revolutionary spirit. Also remember, Marx is also, I mean, I didn't want to go too deep into Marxist ideology or Marxist thought. Marx never believed that revolution would be possible by middle class people. No revolution would be possible by middle class people. If there is going to be a revolution, then it is going to be only by the working class or the poor people. And please notice here, Kalki is the poor man.
Yeah. Thank you, sir.
Sir, if I may add, Anita Rao here.
Please go ahead, ma'am. Anita, ma'am, please go ahead.
Today, when we talk about new social movements, we are talking effectively about participation of the middle class, old people, young people, etc. So this whole notion of the middle class not bringing a revolution is slightly contested, especially under the umbrella of anti-globalization. Secondly, if I were to teach, first of all, I would like to make the student uncomfortable, especially our science and commerce students are a little too complacent. And if we do not make them, aware of the social concerns, they are going to become bad scientists and bad businessmen. So we have to make them uncomfortable. You can do it without mentioning names. You can start from Spartacus. You can go on to, Spiritus Mundi by Yeats, or, you can take a lot of allusions. This is what some person said. This is how they look at, the apocalypse. So there are various ways we can, as you said, draw their attention to the fact that injustice has always existed and it is always being fought in its own way. Even burning of the books is an indication of dissent and protest or suppression of knowledge. So there are various ways we can introduce creatively in the class certain ideas to draw their attention to injustice without mentioning a very contemporary context. And I think in today's context, we need to do it more. Otherwise, education is always has been in the danger of failing. And today with hyper-nationalism, it is certainly failing. Thank you.
I agree with you. I agree with you. And this poem, I mean, what I was trying to say was, yes, I agree. That is what education is about. Education is not merely about the acquisition of certain skills that will enable you to do certain things in an efficient way. I would believe that education is also a means by which you acquire a critical bent of mind. I mean,
where you can process information into knowledge.
Yeah. Where education should lead to the generation of what Stuart Hall called organic intellectuals. Intellectuals who belong to a particular society, may have drawn benefits from the society, but are critical of that society.
Yes.
That is what roughly Stuart Hall meant.
I think they have to be insider critics, sir. They have to be insider critics. If they don't do that, we are in the danger of collapsing as a society.
I agree with you. That is what education should do. But it is increasingly becoming difficult for education to do that.
Yeah, and it is unpardonable for teachers, I mean, I've had this experience even among so many WhatsApp groups. People refuse to talk because of the fear of dissent, being suppressed. If people don't talk, I mean, we are worse than, ignorant if the intellectuals keep silent. So, I mean, when there is in-movement intellectuals, activism, anti-globalization, anti-development, I mean, these are pretexts that we can take to talk about how revolutions can happen without telling them to become revolutionaries. I think that can be done by a teacher.
Yes, it can be done by a teacher. A lot of things can be done by a teacher. I agree with that.
Thank
you. I agree with that. Murtepa sir says that rote learning at previous stages of teaching and learning might have killed resistance in the younger generation. That might have happened, but then we cannot always quote, we cannot always say that the problem has occurred earlier and now we cannot set it right. We are given 2-3 years with them, and we should try and do what we can. I always believe that we should try and do what we can. We may not be able to bring about a total change, but I think we can make some kind of an impression.
At least we can make them think in a particular direction using their own skills. We need not brainwash them. At least we should make them think, period. Which is not happening.
Ask questions. No, you just ask questions without telling them anything overtly. Just ask them questions.
Yes.
That's all. I think
there are, I don't see any other questions here.
Yeah.
Yeah. Akhila
probably
ma'am?
This is the last day, and therefore most of them are exhausted.
Yeah. Akhila
How
ma'am,
can a teacher be exhausted, Yoganand sir? Especially in the company of other teachers.
Akhila ma'am, you're
yeah. Yes, okay. I am.
So shall we conclude the session and move on to the next thing?
Yeah, fine. The principal sir is also here. So.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So we've come to the end of Yoganand sir's session on the poem Kalki by Kuvempu. Thank you, sir, for this very thought-provoking and a very layered analysis that you gave us of Kalki, which gave us about various mythical aspects as well as the ideological underpinnings that the poem actually presents for us, and the kind of potential it holds for us to generate important discussions on social justice and inequality in our society. We, on behalf of Department of English and on behalf of our college and our principal, I extend a very sincere thanks for your talk. Thank you so much for all the.
Thank you very much, and I must thank not only the English department, the principal, but also all those participants who have listened to me patiently.
Yeah. Now.
Thank you very much, all of you.
Thank you, sir. Now I would like Akhila ma'am to carry on the session.
Thank you, Usha ma'am. I am glad that our principal, Dr. Naveen Kumar CM, has also here for the session. And though I had requested him for his remarks, he had asked me to call him in the end. Sir, would you like to talk now or?
Akhila madam, you just summarize the FDP, and probably last I will just
Yes.
give my concluding remarks. Okay. Right. Yeah.
Thank you.
Akhila ma'am.
Sir?
Ma'am.
Yes, sir.
Am I required to be there, or can I log out? Can I leave? How is it?
Yes, sir. You can. You can.
Yeah. Thank you then. Thank you all of you. Thank you once again. Thank you, sir. Principal sir, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. And thank you all of you. And I hope that we will meet under different circumstances sometime. Thank you very
At
much.
least virtually.
Yeah. Good evening. Bye. Bye all of you.
Bye. Thank you, sir. It was nice having you with
Nice
us today.
spending some time with all of you. Thank you.
So proceeding with our deliberations for the day, I would like just to summarize the 5 days deliberations along with thanking everybody. Good evening all. On behalf of the Department of English, Jain College, I take this opportunity to propose the vote of thanks to those who have contributed to this faculty development program. At the outset, I thank the Chief Patron, Dr. Chanraj Roychand, Founder Chairman, Jain Group of Institutions, Sri Ravindra Bhandari Sir, Vice President, Jain Group of Institutions, who are a constant support in all our endeavors. I also would like to thank Dr. N. Sundararajan Sir, Pro-Chancellor, Jain deemed to be University, and Dr. Ishwaran Iyer Sir for their suggestions and valuable support. Thank you, patrons. On behalf of the Department of English, I'd like to extend a heartfelt thanks to our principal, Dr. Naveen Kumar CM, who is a backbone to us in organizing this faculty development program for 5 days. In these 5 days, the speakers on the first day, Dr. Chitra Panikkar, who had her inaugural address about the journey of making these textbooks for the 4th semester for 2 years, and Dr. Padmalochana, the head textbook committee of optional English, Professor Wasim Akram, the member of textbook committee for BSc, Professor Manjula Veerappa, the head of the textbook committee for Communicative English, gave a bird's eye view of their respective textbooks and oriented the faculty members. On behalf of the management, principal, and Department of English, I wholeheartedly thank these guest speakers for their commendable job. I also thank the BOS member, Professor Shivaprasad Sir, to have been with us from day one and has been suggesting us to go about on the right path on this FDP. From day 2 to day 5, the resource persons, Dr. R.V. Sheila, Professor Narsimhan, Professor Leena Karanth, and Dr. Sushila, and today, Dr. Yoganand Rao, gave insightful sessions on the contents of BCom General English and the additional English textbooks of the 4th semester. I offer my deep sense of appreciation and gratitude to all these knowledgeable resource persons for taking time out of their busy schedule and making these sessions interesting and meaningful. I'd like to place on record the efforts of all the BOS, that is Board of Studies members of BCU, and the textbook committee heads and members who have worked relentlessly towards making these textbooks see the light of the day. Along with them, a special thanks goes out to those people who have worked a lot in proofreading DTP works like aligning, spell checks, etc. And also to all those people who have worked behind the screen to make this a reality. I'm grateful to the technical in charge of this faculty development program, Dr. MP Saravanan Sir and Professor Shruti from the Department of management for the smooth conduction of the faculty development program without any technical glitches. A big thank you to both of you. This type of event cannot happen overnight. The wheels start moving about at least a week ago. So when Usha ma'am, Katyayani ma'am, and I started mooting this idea of having a faculty development program for 3 days, and then we extended this to 5 days, I sincerely thank my colleagues without whose support, constant support, anytime they were available on the phones, and even with their all this busy schedule, we just used to have hours together, con calls, and we have given this shape to the FDP what we saw in all these 5 days. Thank you to you both. It requires a lot of planning and a lot of work behind the scene. A special thanks goes out to our student volunteers, Kiranmai, Gunjan, Fazila, Vinay, and Aisha for their tireless efforts. Without your support, we were not able to excel like this. I extend my gratitude to all the participants who have taken part enthusiastically and given their sincere feedbacks and suggestions for our event. We would like to take forward your suggestions sincerely to better our events from now on. I also thank everybody, my fellow colleagues of Jain College, and also the management for giving us this opportunity. The moment I called up Naveen sir and told, he just said, right, madam, go ahead. So for all the support that you have extended to us, thank you so much. Naveen sir, for your remarks.
Yeah. Is my voice is audible, madam?
Yes, sir.
Yes,
okay.
sir.
So good evening. I think from past 5 days, we had online FDP on a department, English, focusing on 4th semester. I think I should definitely extend my sincere appreciation and regards to the Department of Economics. Special thanks to Akhila madam. I think you have done amazing job coordinating with Usha ma'am and Katyayani ma'am. And of course, I should not even forget Dr. Sarvan and Shruti's role in providing the technical support. And it was, I think it's a timely initiative, which I had a remark in my introductory talk, a timely initiative taken by the department. And I'm sure these 5 days have given a good roadmap to all the participants who have been actively participating. And I'm sure they would have understood the difficulties what these chairmen, these members have gone through in bringing out this syllabus for Bengaluru City University. It's not an easy job. I think I should definitely congratulate and appreciate all the efforts of the chairman, the members of various courses, especially BA, BSc, BCom, BBM, or BBA for that matter. I think we need to credit them for their wonderful effort and coordination. And it was visible. They were coordinating. And I'm sure the participants who are a part of this FDP will definitely have got some kind of feedback, some kind of roadmap and some kind of, how to deal with these contents. And it was an excellent job by Jain College English Department in association with IQSC. I think I should give credit. I'm sure this kind of activities will further continue from Jain College, and the Department of English will take it a long way. Okay, so Akhila madam, so it was a wonderful effort, excellent effort, and I'm sure the entire department will take this forward. And my thanks to all the participants on behalf of Jain College, Vasavi campus. I thank all the participants for your active participation to make this FDP a grand success. So thank you so much. All the very best for the future endeavors. Thank you so much, madam. Akila, madam, please.
For your encouraging words. In this uncertain times, to gather all the resource person and the participants to this 5-day FDP was indeed a very great task. We also have learned so many things out of this FDP, and I'm confident that our faculty members and the teaching fraternity will carry it out successfully to our students who are who have to be benefited from these new textbooks in the coming years.
Ma'am.
Thank you, everybody. I'd now like to say something about the feedback forms and the things for the participants. Participants, kindly note, please fill in the sessions feedback form, and there are certain extra indicators for the FDP overall, so that also you please fill in whatever the indicators are there on the feedback form, and please fill it in and submit. And the certificates will be issued to you from tomorrow. It may take, as it is the automated system, it may take up to 72 hours, that is 3 days. So even if after the 3 days or maybe after Monday that you don't receive, kindly revert. Please do not leave the group unless the WhatsApp group, unless you receive the certificate, because whatever the further communication in connection with the certificate and the feedback of the FDP, which will be done in the group itself, not individually. So unless you get the certificate, please do not leave the WhatsApp group.
Yeah, and to add to that, I would like to just say that please check your spam also in your mail. Sometimes the certificates may have gone to your spam folder. So I would request all the participants to check thoroughly all the folders. And if you don't receive it, you can always come back to us and we'll see to it that it reaches you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everybody, for your enthusiastic and meaningful participation. We hope this association of ours continues in future too.
Thank you so much, Akila madam. Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much.